Researchers Forum and for inviting us for this very timely and very well planned, as if you knew something going to happen in Pelgam, and so you organize it in these 2 days. So it's a very important session to be spoken about, and I thank you for inviting me. Now, military strategy or war strategy over the years is what is the subject given to me. Let me start with some kind of um, you know causational factors over last 8 odd decades in Pakistan armed forces life, which mattered maximum. One is that they had a very traumatic experience of 1947 when Pakistan Army got formed. A portion of coming out from India, and the officer class was weak and not existent, and the higher command was just not there. There were financial problems, so they had a very traumatic experience of raising the Pak Army, and the Pak Army was raised in 1947. The second major shock that they got was in 1971 when Bangladesh got separated out and East Pakistan got separated out. Bangladesh became a country by themselves. So that was a great dramatic shock. 93,000 odd prisoners in India, and they had to bend low for the Shimla Agreement, which they are now trying to abrogate in 1972. So that was a very nasty experience for Pakistan. The third major experience for Pakistan Army was 1974 when we tested a so-called peaceful nuclear device. It jolted them out of the reverie, and they found India has become the sixth country in the global community of nations with the nuclear power, and which hurt them tremendously. Then, of course, the 80s period when Pakistan got intimately involved in General Ziaul Haq times in Islamization of the Pak Army done by General Ziaul Haq, and also by the Afghanistan, where a whole lot of weapons came into Pakistan and a whole lot of training being carried out to Taliban, which was raised in Pakistan to combat the Russians. And so that was another experience here. And the last part I wish to say is the question of last 20-25 years, when Pakistan suddenly found India has taken off. And then Krishnan mentioned about the differentials that we've had in GDP and economic growth earlier, in which Pakistan was actually leading in some times of the earlier times. But subsequently, when the Pakistan found that we have taken off in 1995 and we had no stopping us, and now as they continue to rise up, the fifth major issue is the rise of India and the tremendous potential that India is showing, which becomes a very great causative factor in the psychology of Pakistan military hierarchy. Now, having said that, let me talk about 5 foundational factors about Pakistan Armed Forces. One is, and it's already been spoken about, is the issue of national identity, the pehchan of that country as a nation. Now, we boast about 5,000 years of history, and we say, okay, we have proven 5,000 years of history in India. But Pakistan, despite the fact that they start counting sometime when the first Muslim came up from Saudi Arabia and landed on, saying that Pakistan was raised in the 6th, 7th century or started, which is all bakwas. And even 1930 when Iqbal coined the word Pakistan, was just coinage of a word. But Pakistan was actually raised in 1947, maybe in minds of people prior to that. So that identity as a nation, and despite the fact that they have only 4 states, the 4 states compatibility is an issue even today, and the divide along the Indus is total. So the states on the west of Indus, that's Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, have been actually milked away by Pakistan for feeding largely Punjab province and also Sindh. So that there is no pehchan, there is no common identity that Pakistan has been able to make, and that's a very significant part, because this identity is honed in as a Pakistan identity is anti-Indianism or Jammu and Kashmir. Minute anti-Indianism dies and J&K issue is finished, then Pakistan doesn't have a foundation to stand on. Very major issue in their issue. Second is the issue of there is continental quest which started in 1947 of having a parity and a step beyond India. Now, as a nation, it doesn't have the kind of resources that India has got. and kind of push that India has been able to bring about. But there is always a competition with India. Everything is counted as equal in economy, power structures, uh, and this continental quest for parity actually pulls the country down, because they tend to invest into wrong avenues, and that causes great amount of hassle here. Third is that it is driven into the society, is that India is vengeful. India wants to take a revenge for everything. So the vengeful India, which is driven into the masses, actually leads to that issue of having a strategic depth, which they talked about Afghanistan earlier, saying that there is a vengeful India which will come and take revenge from us. So we need to have a strategic depth. So the vengeful India is always in mindful, and it is driven home to the public. Fourth is that the Pathans, especially in Punjabis in Pakistan, felt that they were the martial race. So the martial race concept came up in the British times, 18th century, but finally died away, and there is no concept. And the Indian Army has forgotten that there was even ever a concept of martial races, because there are regiments and battalions and areas and regions which were not martial races, who have proven their worth more soundly in all wars and subsequently later. So you can't say there is a martial race. But Pakistan still believes that the Muslims are a martial race. They have history, such one, and Pathans and Punjabis are the martial race, and it is taught across to their schools and colleges, saying Hindus are weak, which becomes part and parcel of the development of Pakistan armed forces. And the last foundational issue is that it is also driven home that Islam is in danger. And for starting from Lashkar invasion, when Lashkars were actually brought about in the 1947, saying Islam is in danger with India coming up here, and the Islam people in Kashmir will suffer. So right from those days, Islam is in danger, has been spoken about, and it causes a major mindset in Pakistan. And all this while, especially in the 9 years of General Zia, when he came up, he brought about Islam in a very big way. Now I come to the issue of the war strategies. Now, see, it has been evolving, and let's talk about an era pre-1971 and the era post-1971. In the era post pre-1971, this issue of Hindus being weak and the Muslims being stronger and the Pathans being stronger, there was a desire on the Pakistani side to be more and more on larger offensives, and they thought they would succeed in offensives. And hum Delhi chalenge, those kind of phenomena was spoken about, capture of Delhi and flag on Red Fort of India. So there was an offensiveness, strong offensiveness in the thought process. So when we say, and when 62 happened, and it came to light that the Chinese army bested India, so that thought process in 1965 with Gibraltar earlier, and later on in the war itself, the Pakistan army, you see, they tried the double pincer of an offensive which came across from Khemkaran on one side and Dera Baba Nanak on the other side, and joining up together at Bias. Huge pincer that was being evolved across there, thought that the Indian armed forces will disintegrate totally and they will be able to capture the city of Amritsar. And it's also the offensive that came across from Chham and Bhimber, Chham, and those areas to cut across the road to J&K towards Jauria, Aknur. And it was, so, Pakistan Army's own mindset forced them to believe that 1965 was the right time for carrying out major offensives across into India, and India will cut off J&K and they will be able to take on the city of Amritsar, and India will have difficult times. And of course, the Air Force. Pakistan is always prided in its Air Force. They always prove by statistics that they are the victors of all wars. So when they count statistics of number of aircraft down, which is a dubious way of counting as to who was victor and who was a loser, Pakistan Air Force tries to prove that they were the victors, not knowing that it should be measured by number of sorties that a force has been able to generate and kind of offenses that we've been able to carry out. But The Pakistan Air Force says we had lesser number of aircraft down in 65 and in 71 than in the comparison to Indian Air Force. So it was a offensiveness that came up in 1971. We come to post 71, where Pakistan Army got hit and hit badly. Two of these statements are made by Bhutto after the war, actually became the basis of Pakistan Army's mindset subsequently. We all know about those two statements. One is that Pakistan will eat grass, but we will make our own atom bomb. This was said after 1974, where there was a clear direction laid down by Bhutto, saying that despite having suffered the war and so many prisoners of war, but they said, okay, we will make the bomb. And they made a one-point agenda of making Pakistan as a nuclear weapon state. That came up after 71, when they thought that if they had the bomb, they would have able to do much more in the war previously and hereafter. The second major statement made by Bhutto is that we will bleed India by 1,000 cuts. The bleed India by 1,000 cuts is what they have been following subsequently, then Ziaul Haq time, and then consequently after 1990, when there was a withdrawal of Russians from Afghanistan, and they had surfeit of militants and terrorists available and weaponry available left over by the CIA, and they had to utilize it somewhere. So bleed India by 1,000 cuts is the philosophy they started subsequently, built it up by 95, 96 by pushing in foreign terrorists into J&K, and continued hereafter. So their philosophy subsequently after 1971 is largely based on these issues. There is also a reciprocal effect of Indian doctrines that came up. And we must not, talk about Pakistan military strategies and doctrines without talking is what was India talking at that time. Because without Indian thought processes, Pakistan becomes kind of irrelevant. I come to the Sundarji doctrine of 1980s, which is one of the finest ways of proving India was reaching as a level. 80s, as most of us will recollect, was a mechanized era, when the mechanized infantry was raised, and the armored corps came up, the mech forces were found up, and General Sundarji came up with a doctrine of offensive war strategy. 7 corps on the Western Front, total offensive war strategy tried out in brass tacks 1, 2, 3, 4, and it was such a proactive kind of thought process is to launch for destroy Pakistan's center of gravity. At one time, it was stated that we will divide Pakistan into two by the kind of force level that we've been able to generate in 80s and later 80s, and push across into Pakistan. So the Sundarji doctrine gave a kick up the thinking processes in Pakistan, saying that, okay, how do we respond to such kind of major conventional force preponderance that it was being shown. Of course, part of these 7 corps that are located were also in defensive, but the thought process in Sundarji was propounding was largely offensive doctrine. So Pakistan Army woke up to this reality of 80s, saying that that time they were also intimately involved into Afghanistan. Of course, India had also been involved into IPKF and the Punjab insurgency. So that's the time when Ziaul Haq found that 1,000 cuts was a better strategy instead of fighting Indians, because they thought the march of Indian forces have been rising up. So they brought the Punjab insurgency into fore by 82, 83, and subsequently till 92. For 10 odd years, Punjab insurgency was rampant, and Pakistan was able to train and push across terrorists into Punjab and actually cause immense amount of pull back into Pakistan Indian armed forces into some kind of defensive formation. And by the time this Punjab insurgency happened, Afghanistan had finished, and Pakistan's war strategy shifted towards creating the infrastructure for 1,000 cuts into J&K. By 88, 89, they had turned the infrastructure of Afghanistan towards India, and generated that kind of force levels in matters of terrorism to start at 88, 89. So while Punjab was putting back and become normalized the change over the war strategy towards J&K, and that is was their response to the rising offensiveness of the Indian strategy that came up in General Sundarji's times and subsequently. Thereafter comes the Kargil War. Now, the connotation of line of control is well known to us, and it was holders, keepers, the theory of Hindus being weak and unable to perform credibly in wars of this kind. You know, in actually, they were able to launch the second 71 also an offensive into Chamjaudia, like they did in 65, and we were ill prepared for it. So they thought if they could succeed in this, and it, you know, the thought process, though the thought of this was 10 years older, it started in Benazir Bhutto's time in 88, 89 to do a Kargil, and thereby, you know, stop the march of India in Siachen Glacier. So in between 1984, we did the quick march and occupied Siachen Glacier, an area which was ill-defined in the Shimla conference. So Siachen Glacier, and Shokin Chauhan, who sits with me, my good friend, was the pioneer to land up in Siachen at that time. So subsequently, they thought that they could deny Indian forces sustenance of Siachen Glacier by occupying Kargil Heights. The plan took 10 years to mature. It took a seasonable time, and again, Shokin has commanded that 8th Division here. So the concept of limited war. Now, this limited war, as it started in Indian also, the Chief of Indian Army also said, yeah, okay, this is an era of limited war because we just nuclearized, both countries are nuclearized in 1998, and we had tested. So we both did not have delivery means, but we had some amount of weaponry, nuclear weaponry available with us. And there is possible of having a war, a conventional war, a limited war of a kind under the nuclear overhang is what came up in 1999. And we also propounded the same theory, saying limited war is possible. We pushed the issue of line of control being holders, keepers. That theology, which started in Shimla Agreement, died away in 1999, where we refused to accept the incursions that have taken place into Kargil, and at great cost to ourselves, we were able to recapture those busy heights of Kargil and push the Pakistanis behind. It also came to light that at that time, international situation was veering in favor of India because our economic situation had looked up starting in 91. And by the time it came to Prime Minister Bajpayee's time, we were already in the march. We were at that time half of Chinese economy, $500 billion GDP by 2000, while the Chinese were 1 trillion economy. Pakistanis were nowhere around. So we had already taken the strides into this end, and we come to 2001. 2001 becomes a critical year in the history of India, Indian military and Pakistan military, because of the terrorist action being carried out in the parliament and Op Prakram, where we found that there were obvious weaknesses in Indian military doctrine in mobilization of forces and taking action across on the borders and lead on to the offensive. That changeover of 2001 or 2002, which is called Op Prakram, led us, India, to a theory of cold start, where, you know, when we were younger, we used to say offensives were line of the march. But here the armies were going into offensive on line of the march in a cold start theory, which later on being called proactive operations. But the cold start theory of India, which came up in 2003, 2004, and subsequently was tried into 6 exercises, started in 2005, Sangyet Shakti, and right up to 2012. Large number of exercises, major exercises were held on India on the Western Front, where this cold start theory with IBGs, you know, the integrated battle groups launching offensives earlier and pushed in by the strike force later on, was actually tried out. The Pakistan Armed Forces found that this was the most difficult period of their times. This is between 2004 and 2010-12. And they came up with this tactical nuclear weapons. And thereafter, when 2008 happened, early in 2001, it was felt by the Pakistanis that they have been able to deter India by the thought process of nuclear weapons. I'll be finishing in 2 minutes, sir. By the thought process of nuclear weapons, and especially the tactical nuclear weapons or non-strategic nuclear weapons, namely Nasser, which is there they call it, and that was the Hataf 9, as also it's been called, the tactical nuclear weapons, and they went and broadcast it. Now, nuclear weapons have value only if other adversary knows. It's also when the adversary knows the will and the intent of using it. Now, to prove the will and intent, that time Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif first time went across to United States and the assembly and said, we are conventionally inferior to India. India has got conventional forces in substantial numbers. Therefore, we will use nuclear weapon to protect our country. This was stated at that time. Now, this has led to thinking processes subsequently, because the message was being conveyed by a politician. Of course, it was said earlier by the SPD boss, Khalid Kidwai and others. But when the Prime Minister goes, and he also spoke in Heritage Foundation in Washington, saying a similar remark, saying we will use nuclear weapons in case India launches its conventional superiority. That is the issue which was brought to fore, while internally in the armed forces, we said, let's call the bluff, and the bluff has been called in Kargil and many times subsequently in Balakot or also in surgical strikes. But it is a message that they keep addressing to the Indian polity. It is meant for the politicians to take notice of the fact that there are tactical nuclear devices available, despite the fact that India's nuclear doctrine talks about a massive response. So, as we proceeded over in the course of 5 to 7 years, the Pakistanis have found that 1,000 cuts continues across into J&K. They control the tap, allow the tap to increase at one time and reduce at subsequent time, depending on what is the situation there. When Uri happens or Nagrota happens, you can actually recount it's not only the case of some visiting dignitary to India. It's also a case of the internal situation becomes so dire and problematic that they have to actually answer to their call of the nation by revisiting the J&K issue and causing a major terrorist attack into India. It relates itself to what's happened into Baluch insurgencies earlier, largely Baluch insurgencies, what's happened across into Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. If they have a school being hit, they will obviously rise something across into J&K. So it's a systemic in which Pakistan Army keeps believing that they have to keep the pot boiling in J&K if they want to retain their primacy as the foremost organization in Pakistan, and they continue to control, as General Krishnan has rightly pointed out. And to do that, J&K has to be revisited. In the course of last few months, Pakistan Army has suffered tremendously. General Munir's tenure has been bad. His own internal dissensions within his own army have been often reported. There are many generals and colonels sacked in the course of his tenure, which is not normal in Pakistan. And, having said that, they have to relate. So what has happened in Balochistan over the last 3 months ought to be reflected into the statement that he made recently, and it was resulted in what happened in Pahalgam recently. I will end by saying that Pakistan military's war strategy must be related to their typology of military modernization. What are they purchasing? What are they creating their forces? And how are they deploying themselves? So it's obvious that Pakistan Armed Forces have now taken on into a largely defensive offensive strategy along the borders, where the defenses are held and there are large reserves held in defensive formations to thwart the Indian offensive strategy. And their reserves, because they know they will not be able to pull back the major forces deployed on the Durand line and in Balochistan. Therefore, they have brought Frontier Corps deploying in defenses along the obstacle lines here, and thereby creating the regular reserves in the forward tier, so that they don't have to immediately bank on getting the cores which are deployed on the western side. So, and then modernization is related to, and what they're procuring from, say, Turkey or from China, is all related to modern warfare of using drones, of missiles, large number of missiles, electronic warfare, which they are selling across to the Middle East countries, and using AVACs and getting the best of aircraft from the China thing. So there is a kind of standoffness which is coming up into the military modernization of Pakistan Army. It's not been related to any doctrine that has come out, but what they have procured gives a rise to a fact that they are wanting to fight a standoff war, a beyond visual range war in future, and their modernization largely relates to it. You see, I draw your attention to what happened to Iran last year, when Pakistan Army was hit by an Iranian missile, two of them. They immediately were able to push across within 1 day loitering ammunition, which we are now creating a loitering ammunition range. Last week we inaugurated it. But they already had loitering ammunition which was pushed across to Sistan, Baluchistan province of Pakistan, of Iran, and also launched missile in no time. So it gives rise to a feeling, and they managed to do excellent electronic warfare against the Indian Air Force in Operation Swift Resort after Balakot. So their modernization gives a feeling that they want to fight a different kind of war than wanting to fight a war on the borders. I'll end here, sir, and if there are issues here, I'll take it on during the question and answer sessions.
Thank you very much, Rakesh. I think